Your son is gone. He was weak and foolish like his father. So I destroyed him.
What's wrong, Dad? Please tell me.
Your Nan is dying.
She doesn't know, so you can't say anything. The family thinks it's better not to tell her.
Why is that better?
Chinese people have saying, when people get cancer, they die.
We have to go to China.
Wedding is an excuse so everyone can see her.
He's my only cousin. Did you think I should be there?
You can't hide your emotions. If you go, Nan will find out right away.
Really 呀？咋啦？咋不说话呢？
Hello and welcome once again to the Weak and Foolish Movie Podcast. This is episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. My name is Job, and with me, as always, is
Mike Tang.
And today we are actually discussing not Star Wars, but a film called The Farewell, which is about a Chinese-American girl who learns that her grandmother is very sick and has just a few weeks left to live. The catch, however, is that her whole family, including all the relatives overseas, have decided not to tell her the truth. And that is the grandmother, who they call Nai Nai in the story. So the only person in the whole family who doesn't know Nai Nai is about to pass away is Nai Nai, which is a very, very interesting plot. Right at the beginning of the film, there's a title card that reads, based on an actual lie. So we find out that The Farewell, this film, is actually a retelling of the events that happened in the writer-director Lulu Wang in her own experience. She experienced the same thing with her own grandmother and her family. Everything from the script to the casting matches what happened to her in real life. So some background is that Lulu Wang shopped this script to producers in the US and China and didn't have any luck. So she turned it into a personal essay and was featured on NPR's This American Life in the hopes that it could get picked up with that kind of publicity so that she could make the film. So we're going to discuss that today. Our standard format for each episode is a non-spoiler discussion first, which will then be followed by a spoiler section. And in this episode, we're actually going to try something new as well. We're going to try to have a section on worldview, a discussion on worldview and how we view that from the lens of our own personal worldviews. That will come at the end of spoiler discussions, and we will attempt to discuss that. So without further ado, Mike, you want to share some thoughts on this film?
I thoroughly enjoyed The Farewell. I think it's a miracle that this film was even made. It has another all-Asian cast. 90% of the movie is also set in Asia, like a movie that came out last year featuring an all-Asian cast called Crazy Rich Asians. But in this film, 90% of the dialogue is in Mandarin Chinese. So for most of the movie, you're actually reading subtitles. I can't believe that this movie is made because it plays almost like a foreign film. It's a very bold move, and so huge kudos to the people who financed this film and gave it the proper treatment that it deserved. Even though the setting and language in the film is all foreign, the way the film is shot and edited along with music, I feel like it feels very much like an American-made indie film. So that was a really interesting dynamic, I think, in this film. Some other things I really liked about The Farewell, the look of the movie is very distinct. I feel like Lulu Wang really establishes herself as like a solid filmmaker and storyteller. First of all, just from the aesthetics, she uses a lot of pastel colors and darker shadows. It gave it a melancholy yet bright tone. I think that's the best way that I could describe it. And I felt like this was very suitable for the story of the film because, it is about death and it's about family, coming to grips with that. I think nearly the entire movie is made up of static shots or shots that simply just pan or dolly. So very, very smooth movements. And she also frames all the actors in either medium or wide shots. And so the scenes will play out without a single close-up. And you see characters in the foreground interacting and talking while some things happen in the background. And actually, I felt like it gave it a more theatrical feel to the film, in that the actors have more space to work with and move, and it actually felt like an authentic family experience. Like you're actually there watching this family interact. So yeah, just so much to appreciate about how she shot the film and the aesthetic and feel of the film. Awkwafina, it plays the main character, and she is fantastic. Like I said before, the movie's 90% in Mandarin. But right from the first couple words Awkwafina speaks in Mandarin, you can tell that she's not a native speaker. I'm not saying that my Mandarin is like the best or anything, but I think most Chinese Americans who speak Mandarin or who have some kind of exposure to Mandarin can tell right away that when someone's off, because it is a tonal language. So just when your tones aren't right, it's very obvious. So the fact that her performance could still come through dramatically with this difficult barrier of language, because she is acting in Mandarin for most of the movie, I think it speaks to just how much this actress had to stretch herself. And so, yeah, I just felt like, she's normally known for her comedy and for being like goofy on film. Mm-hmm. I think she shows a lot of range as a performer in this film. I gotta also talk about the grandmother character played by Zhao Shu Zhen. She embodies, I think, a lot of the warmth and endearment that many of our grandmothers kind of embody, and the chemistry that she has with Awkwafina feels so natural and charming, and it's as if they've known each other for so long, right? You kind of feel the history between these characters.
Definitely.
So yeah, just overall, like, really solid performances, and it's a very heartfelt, funny film, family dramedy, I'd say. Really well made, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I saw it twice in theaters because I mean, that's how much I appreciated this film.
I thought this was a wonderful film. It was really relatable, realistic, and spoke so deeply to the Asian generational experience. I am pretty Americanized in my upbringing, but there is the generational aspect, and I do have a lot of relatives overseas still. So I felt so instantly plugged into the heart of this story and why it matters, and why the setting is so important, and why generations are so different. And I love the humor that's inherent in this film. It's visible in just the idea of having two generations colliding, and they're not just generations, they're culturally different as well. They're separated by the entire Pacific Ocean, but even besides location, there's ideology, there's worldview, there's all sorts of things colliding together, and that will lead to just some inherent comedy, and I feel like it wasn't in our face. It wasn't really this thing that is like, look at how silly Chinese people are, it was very realistic and respectful, and I really appreciated that in this film. In a lot of ways, Crazy Rich Asians kind of plays on the sheer absurdity of cultural differences amongst Chinese and also just Asian cultures. But I feel like this one kind of portrays a really grounded, down-to-earth portrayal of that difference. But there are still funny things. One little note is there are a lot of moments in this movie where you see the looks on characters' faces, and also when you mentioned some medium shots, I think, earlier, and in the background there's like something else going on that's really funny. Maybe someone's like doing something in the background that's just really silly looking, or just the faces that these characters are making in the middle of all of this. It just really gives it some charm and some level of immersion that I think is so authentic to the experience of an Asian American family colliding with their Asian cultural relatives, I suppose. It's almost so rich.
Yeah, the comedy and like you talked about comedic things happening in the background. It kind of almost reminds me of like a Wes Anderson film. Maybe not to the degree, not to the degree of quirkiness, but definitely it has. I think it has some of those elements.
Yeah, it's got this dryness to it that is so charming and also really interesting. You wouldn't think to do that if you're thinking comedy, but it shows through, and I think a lot of props goes to Lulu Wang for her direction and how she really crafted and structured the shots and how all the various layers kind of weave themselves or unravel themselves as the movie goes on. I think it's such a rich movie. It's even more enhanced if you did experience this growing up, as you and I did, as Asian Americans, with a Chinese background, and I think this movie has a lot to offer to everyone else as well. One more thing, I thought your mention of colors was really interesting because that's what I noticed too. I felt like it felt rather gloomy, but I think a lot of the environment and the way the picture is colored, like the shots are colored, kind of. And I probably have to see this movie again to double check. But to me, how I felt and experienced the movie was as Billy kind of felt more and more displaced. It felt like the colors got more and more like sparse and desaturated. As she moved from America to China, it just kind of helps us to feel this sense of displacement that Billy is feeling as well, and how wide of a chasm there is in between our cultures. Awkwafina, who plays Billy, is wonderful. I was worried she would be a lot like her character in Crazy Rich Asians, just really silly and over the top. But she showed in this film how much range she has as a dramatic actress, and I think a lot of props goes to her as well for making this whole story come alive.
Yes, I think something you said that was interesting was like it portrays culture in China or Chinese culture in a respectful manner, while also still maintaining a level of humor. Mm-hmm. And I think something that I thought of was Lost in Translation, where that movie is two foreigners, like completely foreign, like they're just two Americans, non-Japanese people staying in Japan, and I think that movie kind of makes fun of the culture at the expense of the culture,
Right.
Not so much being as respectful for it. I think if that movie were to come out today, definitely a lot of controversy would rise from it. Interesting. I felt like this is an example of a way to kind of find humor in these clashes in culture, but in a respectful manner.
Yeah, I agree. Even there's just some cultural elements to being Chinese that even I, as a Chinese American, find kind of funny, having grown up in the States, and it's presented as kind of. It does seem silly, but it's never to the point where we're pointing and laughing at it, if that makes sense.
Right.
And I love that. I love that in the movie for that. Any other thoughts, Mike, before we move into more of the story elements?
No, I think I'm good on non-spoilers for now. I think we could talk more deeply in the spoilers section.
All right. Spoilers in 1, 2, 3. Let's do spoilers.
Okay, I think we could talk about the arc of the Billy character first. I think this film isn't so much about lying or the family. I think the central, maybe the A story of the film, is actually about Billy's transformation as a character. Mm-hmm. She starts off the movie with very little understanding of her family's cultural heritage, to someone who finally gets it and it embraces it at the end. Mm-hmm. Right. She starts out at the beginning at odds with her family. She's the only person who's objecting to her family's decision to lie to the grandmother about her cancer. Mm-hmm. But she just simply complies at the beginning because they like she's outnumbered. Everybody's urging her repeatedly not to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
So throughout the movie, she actually tries to get them to reconsider multiple times, and even asks the doctor about it.
Yeah.
So there's a specific shot, I feel like, that revealed this arc. In the middle of the film, we have a slow motion tracking shot of Billy walking alone through the streets of China, or Changchun, whatever, where the film is set. And there's a decisive moment that comes at the end of the wedding when they're taking a family photo. Nai reveals she sent the helper to retrieve the test results, and Billy's actually the one who takes off running to intercept the results so that Nai won't find out, and so therefore upholding the lie. And when this plan succeeds, Nai reads the altered results. The film cuts to the same type of slow motion tracking shot, but now it's of Billy walking with her entire family around her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I felt like this basically told us the arc. Like, she's walking alone by herself in the beginning, because she was at odds with her family, but at the end she's now compliant
with
them.
everybody.
Yeah. And it's like
really
her
great
finally.
catch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I only noticed that during my second viewing, because I knew those shots were coming.
Yeah, I didn't catch the significance of that, but I think that's totally it. Is that she came in as an outsider, all alone, the American with the idealistic view that, every man for himself kind of thing, but comes away as part of the family, part of, complying. I find that really fascinating. We don't really feel like we're rooting. I feel like this film is very gentle to the audience in that it doesn't really push us to one side or the other of rooting for where Billy goes with this. Part of me wanted her to just spill the beans and tell the truth because, we believe the truth will set us free. And, we hear that all the time. But then the film never pushes us far enough where we're just adamantly hoping and demanding as an audience that she does it, because it also presents like the other side of the coin and the burden that the family decides to bear on behalf of their grandma, to carry the burden of knowledge, of knowing that she's about to die and taking that away from her so she could enjoy her last few weeks or months on this planet. And it's really interesting because it's like, which side do we really play on? And there are moments where the film teases us and hints that she might just go ahead and drop the truth to Nai, because she just can't take it anymore, But I feel like when the tension starts to rise, the camera kind of eases us away from the tension, and she restrains herself and decides to just let it go in that moment. And I feel like that the film is guiding us through where Billy is going through. It's like, should we do it? Should we not do it? I really felt like I was going on that that mental journey with Billy. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's so great. It's so brilliant in that way, because so many times films will kind of project, you have to feel sad in this moment, And I didn't get that really. I mean, the emotional moments were very emotional, but it didn't feel manipulative. It felt like real life. It felt like it's not so black and white sometimes,
Yeah, I remember that scene at the wedding where Billy goes up with the mic, and you whispered, "Oh my gosh, is she gonna spill the beans now?"
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was my reaction too when I first saw it. I'm like, okay, here it comes. Here's the moment, because that's essentially what the audience is like, kind of rooting for. Like, hey, she has to tell the truth. But
yeah,
I'm glad that didn't happen, and I think it's so much more interesting that she's the one who kind of complies with the family, and then learns and understands the reasons why they chose to lie to her.
Right. Okay, well, Michael, tell me about the East versus West themes in this film. I think that's a really broad like meta theme that's kind of surrounding the film. Let's talk about that a little bit. Yeah, why don't you go ahead and
Yeah.
give some thoughts on that?
So I think a common theme here with some of these Asian American films is that tension, right, that we have between Asian culture and Asian American culture, East versus West. And there's a scene with Awkwafina and her uncle and dad where they explicitly talk about Western individualism versus Eastern collectivism.
Nice.
And in that scene, Billy can only think of her own guilt over lying to Nai, right? That's basically throughout the entire movie, she feels guilty. But the uncle's point was that a person's life, this is just quoting from the trailer, like a person's life is one part of a whole, which is family. So I think her arc is basically the eventual acceptance of Eastern collectivism. And I thought this is interesting because it's a reversal of what we saw in last year's Crazy Rich Asians. In that film, the Western philosophy of individual happiness, individuality, won over the Eastern family collectivism. And I think therein lies the beauty of telling these Asian American stories. You get a diversity of experiences and viewpoints. I don't think either one is right or wrong. It's just in some relationships and families, the Western viewpoints will win. In some viewpoints, like we accept the Eastern side and the Eastern culture, right? So I think there's learning to be done on both sides for both East and West. So I think The Farewell actually is just as important of an Asian American film as Crazy Rich Asians in telling these kinds of stories.
Yeah, I agree. I also think Crazy Rich Asians is an example of like projecting what we need to feel in a lot of ways. I felt like the whole film I was rooting for Constance Wu's character, the Asian American,
Right.
Who, the underdog, the one who doesn't own a million houses or whatever it looks like. And I feel like from the beginning we were supposed to root in a certain direction. And I think that's what makes this film kind of different, or completely different really, is we aren't really told which way is the right way. And in this instance, I really like what you said. Some families will tend towards a more Western viewpoint, and some will stick true to their Eastern philosophy and values. And in the same way, we're seeing one family grapple with this difference. The truth matters because each person has an individual responsibility to know the truth or whatever. And I just think it's really cool that that's the case. I felt like there were some great portrayals of Eastern Asian culture that were really respectful and really heart-wrenching. One of the scenes that really got me was when at the wedding, this fake wedding that all of them collaborated to deceive their grandmother, basically. One of Billy's uncles, one of the grandmother's sons, went up to give this speech. And as he's making the speech, he begins to weep because he feels this sorrow that he was not there for his mom more, because he had moved to Japan to live out his career, and he brought his kids with him. And it's devastating because we as an audience know why exactly he's crying. He's crying because I think he does feel guilt that he wasn't there for his family, but also he knows that she's dying and he's carrying this weight, and it's just so beautiful and heart-wrenching all at once. It just felt so real to me, and I've been in family gatherings too, where when speeches are given to our grandmother, people feel that sense of, I was not there for my family. So this value of family is so strongly portrayed in this film, and in all of its heartbreaking beauty, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think I've definitely felt that way too about my own family being separated from my grandparents, and I'm sure my dad and my mom have felt that way too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and our parents even, when they moved here to the States, they kind of sealed, in a way that they were gonna have a different worldview when all is said and done. I feel,
Yeah.
not knowingly, because you never know what you're doing while you're doing it. You only know after the fact. But I think in this film, Lulu Wang does a really good job of juggling like how completely different the social systems of Eastern and Western culture are. Even here, we do family pretty well here. I think as Asian Americans, that still is very real, the family value. But we do value personal ambitions a lot in America. I mean, even down to if our parents are positioning us to have the best education and to get the best jobs, that's like in the name of like individual achievement almost, and that's so different from back east, at least as portrayed in this film, where they're like, none of that matters. We have to just preserve this light. We have to come together. Even the wedding that they staged, the fake wedding, it was one of Billy's, sorry. One
Same
of
thing.
Billy's, say, that's true. That's how blurred the lines are. Billy's cousin only knew this girl for like, what was it, 2 months, 3 months maybe? And they tried to stage it so that they were getting married quickly, so that the family had to get together and see their Nainai, their grandmother, all in the guise of, let's get together for this wedding, when really they all came together to say goodbye to the grandmother. And even giving up that agency of choosing when you were to get married in the name of helping the family achieve what it was trying to do is so different. I mean, can you imagine being asked that here? I mean, can you imagine if your family demanded that of you?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't compute to me. But
Yeah,
that's how crazy it is, Yeah.
Yeah, Lulu Wang has. I think I listened to a podcast where she was talking about, her experience going through these events, and she would be in China with her family, and then she would come back to the U.S. And then when she would share with her friends in the U.S. about the decision that the family made to like not tell the grandmother, like, then they're just automatically like, dude, that's crazy, that's insane, like, why would you do that?
Right.
So it's like they don't fully understand like the idea, the philosophy of like an Asian family and how family comes first. And so I think part of the reason why she made this film is to kind of process and sort through all those things, and to also kind of tell the story so that we can people can have a better understanding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's wonderful. Shall we move into the new section, the worldview section? You feel like we're ready for that?
Let's do it.
Okay. So give us some thoughts, Mike, on worldview, what you feel like you could see from your worldview lens in this film.
The purpose of this section is because, we are both Christians, and we actually wanted to include something in this podcast where we can discuss worldviews in the movies that we watch, when appropriate, of course. Like
Right.
a movie like Avengers Endgame, I'm not so sure how much worldview we can get from that movie. It's just, it's pure entertainment, which is totally fine. And, we just want to go in and have a good time. But also, when it's possible, like in a film like this, I feel like it's just so rich in thematic elements that, we can compare and contrast the views in this film, or in films like it, with our own Christian worldview.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and I felt like this film, the focus was on the practice of not telling a loved one they are dying, to save them from the pain of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So for the characters in the film, suffering is something that brings a lot of despair, not just to the family, but to the person who is suffering. And despair of getting cancer is so great, right? It's so great that it's better for them not to know and to go on living their life as if they are not terminally ill.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of like the the worldview that's presented to us,
Right.
Lying to save someone from despair and from suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So I think these people don't believe in God or the gospel, so their views on suffering are obviously different from ours. And for some, all they can see is the suffering and the finality of death, right? That's the end.
Yeah.
So contrasting this with the Christian worldview, I just wonder, is this the most loving thing that we can do, to lie and refrain from telling the truth about impending suffering and death? And a passage that I thought of when I was thinking about this was 1 Peter 1, 6 through 9. And so I'm reading this from the ESV. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes through it, is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. So the Apostle Peter is addressing a church that is undergoing heavy persecution. Some are being thrown in prison. Some are losing their lives for having faith in Christ. They're under heavy pressure to forsake their faith, to save their own lives. So this church he's writing to is suffering. But Peter explains to them that the purpose of their suffering is the testing of their faith. There's a design behind suffering. So even, I think we can kind of extrapolate this, right, to not necessarily persecution, but also cancer, disease, illness, or tragedy, some kind of unfortunate circumstance that really can cause us pain and despair.
Mm-hmm.
So he's just explaining here that suffering refines our faith. It makes it more precious than gold. It makes us depend on God more. It makes us see. It helps us to see that this is actually there's a blessing actually behind this suffering. So
Yeah.
I think in the context of the film, when a Christian is faced with cancer, the most loving thing is not to lie to them. The most loving thing would be to encourage them and to make them see, as the scripture teaches it, the purpose behind the suffering that we are about to go through.
Mm-hmm.
That's not easy at all. Our natural instinct as humans is to panic and be anxious and worry, to fear for our own well-being. But I think we can find encouragement. That the encouragement here in the scripture is to know that God has a plan, and that our faith is only going to be stronger by going through this kind of suffering. So not to lie, not to live as if it doesn't exist, but to actually embrace it full on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good. And and you mentioned earlier the finality of death, kind of informing what this family is deciding to do, because we want her to enjoy her last days before she passes on to supposedly nothing. But as Christians, we believe there's hope beyond this world. There's eternity to account for, and these lives that we live are just a small blip on the great grand scale of eternity. And if you don't have that view in mind, then this stuff really does matter to them, like making each moment count on earth. I mean, we're called as Christians, and I think it's a human call as the human race, to live each moment, to make it worth it, and to live your lives ready to make each moment count, just like Jack said in the Titanic, to make each moment count. Yeah. Had to get that in there. But yeah, if we have hope for more beyond this life, this kind of stuff actually isn't as crucial. I might be using the wrong word here, but I hope you get what I'm saying. But there's also tension, right? I mean, there's such tension in the real life analog. I mean, I think we see it at the end of the movie. That's Lulu Wang's grandma, right? In the credits, or like right before the credits.
Right.
Yeah. And we find out that Lulu Wang's grandma is actually still alive after all this time. It's been years, maybe?
Yeah, I think she said 6 years after her
years.
diagnosis.
That's right. After her initial diagnosis, after the family pretty much lied to her and said she's going to be okay, she lived and survived, which is miraculous. Did their lying play a part in this, or was it something else? We don't really know, but does the idea of having hope and having this like internal fortitude, knowing that you're going to be okay, is that enough to save your life? You know, we hear a lot in our culture about positive reinforcement and the benefits of, good self-care and self-image. I'm just curious to know, and there's probably no way for us to do this without doing some heavy research, but how often are cancer-related deaths actually a result of the physical, emotional, and mental stress of knowing that you're sick and knowing that your body is dying? I find that part really interesting. Where I fall on this is, of course, I'm going to tell the truth every chance I get, because we believe that truth sets us free. It really does, and that's not just on a follow the Bible kind of basis, but it really does kind of set your heart on free. Living with a lie really hampers your health and emotionally, and even can leak into the physical realm of health. So on a physical level, I would tell the truth, but it's just really interesting knowing in this particular context in the story that Lulu Wang's Nai survived. After all this time.
I think maybe, I wonder if that's a case for lying, right? Like, hey, because we lied, she kind of just lived life the way she was, and she was a happy person, and she
stayed strong. She's doing well. It's really interesting, right? Like, I mean, it's almost like at the end of the day, that's kind of the sealing argument that the filmmaker presents to us, is that, by the way, Nai is still with us.
Right.
6 years later. Boom! Boom goes the dynamite. It's like, so lying is good, is almost what it feels like the movie is punctuating at the end. But it's interesting, it's really interesting to think about. Would you lie, and this is kind of, this is just a thought exercise, would you lie if it meant you could save someone's life?
Yeah, that's a topic for a whole another
podcast, I think. Yeah. Well, hopefully, for those of you who have stuck with us so far in this episode, this section kind of helps you to think a little bit more about what would you do in this situation, and how life is a lot more complex than like what the movies often show us. I'm so grateful for a gift of a movie like this. And I think cinema is at its best when it makes us feel, but when it also makes us think and really process our own lives and what we're doing, and kind of when it shines a mirror or puts a mirror in front of us and says, this is life, and what are you going to do about it, in a way. I think that's when cinema is at its best, and that's when it truly moves me. No disrespect at all to Hobbs and Shaw, which is a great, I almost said great film.
A great bad movie.
A great bad movie. Escapism certainly has its place in cinema, but I think it's at its best form when we're having discussions like this days after seeing the film.
Yeah, definitely. I think definitely The Farewell, probably one of the best films of the year. I think.
I would say so.
I think that's
yeah.
safe to say.
Yeah.
Just really great craftsmanship by Lulu Wang, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not a complex film at all. It's pretty laser focused on this one thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it's able to say so much, and it's so rich. Obviously,
Yeah.
like look how long we've been talking about. We're not talking about the plot of the movie. We're talking about all these things that happen beneath the surface.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely looking forward to what else she does. It seems like these indie filmmakers get plugged into these cinematic universes that these studios are establishing. So maybe Lulu Wang's going to direct Shang-Chi too.
Shang-Chi 2, starring Awkwafina.
Well, Awkwafina is in Shang-Chi, so
Oh, she is.
yeah,
Oh, no
they
way.
casted her. I don't know as
I
who,
missed
but
that. I missed that news. Yeah. Wow, that's exciting. Yeah, guys, Asian Americans are on the rise in Hollywood and in popular filmmaking. I mean, do we want to talk about any of that? The feeling of where Asian Americans stand in popular culture, in the media.
I think just some recommendations, other notable Asian American films. Searching, like you mentioned, this is a great suspense thriller. Highly recommend that. All the main characters are Asian Americans, but they're actually just portrayed as regular people. They don't have
Yeah.
very little to do with Asian or Asian American culture. One thing that's really interesting about this movie is
We're
that
not
it's
kung
told-
fu fighters, you know.
Yeah. There's just this guy who works at a tech company, and his daughter goes to school. He's taking AP Bio. Just a normal family.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, what's unique about this film is that the entire film is told on a computer screen. And
Yeah.
so it sounds like a gimmick, but it's actually surprisingly effective. Lots of twists and turns in the movie, so highly recommend you check it out if you haven't seen it already.
Definitely. That one's one of the best films I've seen in a long time. So check that out.
Yeah, I think it was in our top 10 movies for
Last year,
2018.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Another. So you mentioned Crazy Rich Asians. We've talked about Crazy Rich Asians in our discussion on The Farewell, but this is a story actually between my wife and I, except without the rich part.
But you're
this
crazy,
film,
right?
I think when you boil down to it, it has to do with like traditional Eastern standards versus Western standards for marriage. And so I won't go into too many personal details, but there's a lot in this movie that my wife and I could relate to, and it's a totally different movie than The Farewell. It's bombastic. It's a huge Hollywood studio production, so there's a lot of fantastical elements to the film, which I think stories can take place and take shape in a variety of forms. So I think some people kind of knock on this movie because of just its outlandishness, but I think it's a rom-com.
It's a
like
rom-com.
you gotta have these fantasy elements to it, and
Yeah.
I don't mind it. I like rom-coms. I like fairy tales, and this is definitely one of those. But still beneath all that, I think there's a core story and a core theme to it that my wife and I actually found extremely relatable.
Yeah, it certainly felt a little more thought-provoking for a rom-com than the usual, typical rom-com. I felt because of the cultural thing we've talked about a lot. So another one that you might want to check out is Always Be My Maybe. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a Netflix original. It's also pretty much a rom-com, but it's just great to see these pretty solid films where Asian Americans are actually pretty interesting, unique characters that aren't just a cultural caricature, that are not just kung fu fighters, that don't have the wispy mustaches and always wearing kimonos, all of that. So check those out as well. There's one film, it's a Korean film called Burning that I really want to watch. Have you heard of that one?
I have heard of it. It's on my
Steve Yeun
it's
in
on
it.
my queue. Yeah, Is
Yeah,
that
I've
is
heard great
that
things about
does that count as an Asian American film, or is that
Actually,
like purely from Asia?
That's true. It might not, but it features Steve Yeun, who's an Asian American actor who stars very famously in The Walking Dead. So I feel like we can count that, but if not, we can strike that off the record too.
Awesome. And
Yeah.
just I wanted to plug one more film, Better Luck Tomorrow. This is a movie that came out when I was in college. This is like a long time ago, like at least 15 years ago. But this is a film about like a cheating scandal at Fullerton High School. It was based on a cheating scandal at Fullerton High School where one of the students ended up being murdered and killed. So I think this was huge because it showed Asian Americans in a different light, not as a model minority. I mean, it shows us as hardworking and students who care about SAT scores, but these guys cheated and were selling answers or something, and they got embroiled in this huge controversy behind the scenes, and it ended up with someone being killed. So,
Wow.
Yeah, really, definitely one of the hallmarks of Asian American cinema, and I think you can put it up there with Searching, Crazy Rich Asians, Always Be My Maybe.
And now the farewell.
And The Farewell, yes.
I think it's time for us to say farewell too. So if you're still listening, thanks so much for joining us on the Week in Foolish Movie Podcast. This is episode 9. The farewell. It's time to go. The farewell. And so thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. I think our next episode we will be doing a summer movie recap. Which should be really fun. I'm looking forward to that
There
one.
are so many movies and so many
We are
things
gonna
we could
talk.
say.
We're gonna talk about the masterpiece that is Hobbs and Shaw in the next film, in the next podcast episode. So stay tuned. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. See you later.
Farewell.
Farewell. Bye.